Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this incredibly special event where we are privileged to be hosting a discussion about the social media technology design and the impact that it has on children. My name is Tara Hine Phillips, and I'm the CEO at Jolt. We are a filmmaker-first distribution platform designed to amplify independent films and documentaries. And our whole purpose is to bring important stories to audiences that most want to see them. And we do that in partnership with filmmakers like Matt O'Neill and Perri Peltz, who are the filmmakers behind Can't Look Away. We are so fortunate to be bringing Can't Look Away to audiences, and we are thrilled to be joined today by several of the people in the film and the people behind really revealing what's going on under the curtain. So we're so excited to bring you this conversation. We have a couple of quick housekeeping tips. Please feel free to use the chat, but we will also be monitoring the QA box at the bottom of the Zoom window. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to add them there. Also, we are delighted to welcome conversation in the chat. We do ask, of course, that it remain supportive and, and in the spirit of discussion and respectful spaces. So without any further ado, I would love to introduce Olivia Carville. The film is based on Olivia's reporting, and she is an investigative reporter at Bloomberg News, who are the producers of the film and just incredible partners in bringing the story out into the world. Olivia writes about the intersection of child safety and the digital world for Business Week magazine, and she's also the president of the New York Financial Writers Association and an adjunct professor at Columbia Journalism School. She teaches these investigative reporting techniques to young people. Welcome, Olivia. Thank you so much for being here, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Tara. And hello and welcome to everyone who is joining us today. Thanks again for being here and for taking part in such an important conversation. I've been reporting on the dangers of the digital world at Bloomberg for about 4 years now. And during that time, I've really noticed the conversation around social media shift. It's moved from could these platforms harm the mental health of kids towards we are in a full-blown youth public health crisis. And I believe that shift has come in large part because of the courageous efforts of our three panelists today, who have put the safety of kids online ahead of their own to share the truth about what is going on inside these companies. And it's my honor to introduce our three panelists. We have Frances Haugen, a data scientist, former algorithmic product manager at Facebook. You probably remember her congressional testimony from 2021. She exposed thousands of internal company documents revealing Facebook was prioritizing profit over safety. And since then, she's also founded the nonprofit Beyond the Screen and has become a well-known social media accountability advocate. Welcome, Frances. Charles Barr founded his first digital marketing agency at just 14. He was advising companies on how to engage with Gen Z. And in 2020, at age 18, he joined TikTok to help brands launch advertising campaigns on the platform. He wasn't afraid to blow the whistle, and he warned senior leaders at TikTok that the algorithm was sending steady streams of harmful content to kids. He's continued to have that conversation on a global public format and is joining us today, and he's now the CEO of ZCG, a consultancy firm for the new economy. And our third panelist is Arturo Bejar. He spent 6 years working as a senior engineering and product leader at Facebook, where his job was to help design the tools to really keep users safe. He left the company in 2015 and then returned a few years later, where he worked as a consultant focused on well-being issues at Instagram. You also probably recall in November 2023, Arturo testified before Congress about social media and the teen mental health crisis. He's also been advocating on this issue ever since. Thank you again to our three panelists for being here with us. And I'd like to start this conversation with some context by playing a short clip from Can't Look Away. So could we please play clip 1?
For over a decade now, these companies have profited by taking what we create and post on their platforms, then feeding it back to us in endless streams of content that they know we can't look away from.
Facebook is under fire tonight following testimony by a former employee.
Almost no one outside of Facebook knows what happens inside of Facebook. The company intentionally hides vital information from the public, from the US government, and from governments around the world.
One of the things I've heard all three of you talk about in different capacities and to different audiences is how social media manipulates user behavior. But for those of us on the call who haven't worked inside these companies, who might not understand how an algorithm works, because these are quite difficult concepts to grasp, Charles, I was hoping that you might be willing to share some of the hidden ways in which these platforms manipulate the behavior, especially the behavior of children and teenagers.
Thank you for the introduction, Olivia. I believe it's a very important topic, because if you look down to what an algorithm is, I think people often forget that these algorithms, they aren't originally built to be evil, but they're mostly built to be efficient. So the goal of every algorithm, which is just the recommendation system that recommends content to the single user out there, is in the end to show you the next piece of content you're most likely to react to, and that even very fast. So every scroll that you do inside the app, every pause, even maybe in a momentary hesitation, it really sends a signal back to the algorithm. So especially with younger users who explore topics maybe in a less controlled way, this means that you can very quickly land in kind of a content tunnel or downward spiral, as I call it. And I think the algorithm doesn't know if you're 25 or 13. So it just notices you pause, for example, on a body image video, and suddenly that becomes the foundation for the next 50 recommendations in your feed. And I think that's not an addiction in a classical malicious sense, but yeah, it really is the algorithmic over-optimization of everything, but without this emotional intelligence behind it. So I think the issue is on the one side the algorithm itself, but also that it doesn't differentiate in between who the user on the other side in the end really is.
Thank you for that, Charles. And before I get to your question, I just want to pivot back to Francis, because I can see you again now. And
Yeah.
you know, can you share with us the moment for you when you realized, you know, I can't stay silent anymore?
Less than 30 days after the US 2020 election, Facebook called us all together on a big Zoom meeting, much like this one, and announced that they were reorganizing, that they were integrating into the rest of the company the group of people that were tasked with making sure that Facebook was a positive force in society on a kind of societal level. We weren't the children's well-being group, but we were the group that was responsible for things like ethnic violence or election disturbances or foreign interference, that kind of thing. And, you know, I think there's a real thing where you can be an employee at one of these companies and have concerns and still believe that, you know, at least there is progress being made, even if it's not as fast as you would like. Like Arturo, I am certain while he was there, was like, at least I'm contributing, because he came back to do it a second time. But if the company then dissolves the part of the company that you're working in because you are so important that you need to be integrated into the rest of the company, you can get pushed over that line and say, well, if they can't save themselves, then we have to go bring in outside help to help save them instead.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing, Francis. And thanks again, Charles, for your description of algorithms and helping us understand how they work. I would like to just remind everyone on the call, if you haven't seen the film Can't Look Away, there's actually a clip where Charles discusses his own experience at TikTok, and he conducts an experiment where he actually uses the algorithm to see what it might be sending to youth. And I was wanting to show that clip so you can all see what Charles means when he talks about the manipulation of the user. So could we please play clip 2?
At the age of 18, I landed my first full-time job at TikTok. When I joined, there was a total hype around TikTok. I was actually quite proud to work at the company because I was part of this big mission. Then in the summer of 2021, I saw a Wall Street Journal article testing how TikTok is creating echo chambers, especially for young people that really have a significant negative impact. So I started my personal experiment, screen recording a new account to see how much time it takes for me to then be personally affected by these videos.
In Germany, we don't say.
TikTok is designed for you to spend more and more time on the app. And with every minute that you're on, there are 3 to 4 advertisement slots in your feed. So TikTok earns money with you spending more time on the platform. The algorithm identifies how much time you spend on a single video. You could have searched for inspirational quotes, but in the end, your feed is not reflecting what you search for, it's what you spend time on. So I could see 6 videos that I just swiped through, and the 7th one has a really sad message, and I spent time on it. It took me 15 minutes with just a few triggers of likes and comments under different postings to make sure that my feed was just dark quotes, breakup content, and even people motivating others to support self-harm or eat disorders. When I saw these videos over and over in my For You feed, they had an impact on me. And I still remember a few days where I was just sitting right before midnight in front of my feed crying. I tried contacting a guy in London that was high in the hierarchy of the company, sending him my example of the screen recording and saying, hey, can you have a look into this? But he didn't even give me a single answer while I was at the company.
Charles, I feel that you do such a good job of explaining how the algorithm actually works, and to see it playing out in real time, you know, the way in which the videos, this kind of steady stream of content might manipulate your own personal experience is really powerful. And I know that clip is all about TikTok, and obviously TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, Meta. I mean, these are different companies. Well, Facebook and Instagram are all within Meta, but Meta, TikTok and Snapchat are all different companies within the same industry. And I wanted to talk about Facebook and Instagram's recommendation algorithm. So Arturo, I was hoping you could come in here and share how the recommendation algorithm works. What's some of the hidden manipulation mechanisms within Meta, and how is the algorithm kind of designed or engineered to drive addiction?
Yeah, a good way to think about it is everything Meta does as a company is designed to drive things that you use as much as possible for as long as possible. And they don't care about how they go about that. There's not an attention to is this feed, is this combination of things something that's bad for the person. And so you create these things that are very sensitive to when you watch something. And if you watch something out of disgust, like Charles did such a wonderful job of explaining this. Like I've done similar tests where you run into a video where somebody's jumping off the roof, they hit a piece of concrete and their back breaks like that. There's no gore, so there's no blood, so it doesn't break any of the platform rules. And if you watch that, then you just get a lot more of that very quickly. Within a minute or two, you get a stream of that. And they like to pretend that there's ways of controlling that. There's a not interested button. But again, when you test these things, you say not interested, not interested, not interested, and it doesn't change the next video. One from an account called Only Broken Bones. Again, I'm being fairly graphic because I think one of the things that happens is because these things happen in private on our screens. As parents, we have absolutely no idea what our kids are seeing. And then Instagram and Meta go so out of their way to paint a picture that everything, and they're doing such an incredible job of keeping people safe, which is an actual lie, because whenever you test using these kinds of accounts, you find incredibly awful sexual content, violent content, hateful content, delivered to a test account that was for a 13-year-old, right? And so I think ultimately, Reels design, the way messages are designed, the way your feed is designed, all these things are geared to maximize the amount you spend there, no matter the cost to the individual on there.
And I mean, it's interesting you point that out, because what we've heard time and time again from defenders of these platforms is that when we talk about user harms or kids who have been harmed through social media, these are bad kids misusing good products. Or there's a philosophy out there that it's the parents' job to monitor what their kids are doing online, that parents are responsible when things go wrong. And Francis, given your experience at Facebook, what do you think about that argument? Just a reminder
I
to
think
unmute.
I know, I'm sorry. Given how fast technology is moving, it's really unreasonable to say that parents need to be the primary line of defense when it comes to these products, right? One of the things that I really enjoyed about the documentary was they walked through cases of kids who, ate dinner with their parents every day, whose parents were on top of it enough that they were doing spot checks weekly, and what was in their kids' feeds, and yet their kids still got harmed in really severe ways. The children died. Um, One of the things that I think is important for us to call out is that that's a best case scenario. Like, that's a two-parent family where both of them have enough time and enough energy to spend time with their kids and have a good enough relationship that they feel vulnerable enough to openly show phones and all these things. Parents today, we're not are too old to have, the vast majority of them, to have experienced being a 13-year-old on Snapchat, being a 13-year-old on Instagram, of experiencing someone sharing an intimate image around a school non-consensually. All of these things are, when we push them back on parents and say that parents are the primary means of keeping kids safe, it's a really unfair burden. And I think part of what makes me angry when I hear Charles or Arturo talk about these things is we have really low-hanging fruit that could be picked if you wanted to keep kids safer, right? If you extort 2 children, your account should be banned. Probably 1 child, your account should be banned. If you are seeing more and more depressing content, the platform should prompt you and say, hey, we noticed you're looking at a lot more depressing content than you were last week. Do you want to keep doing that? And yet we only gained the right to reset our algorithms on one platform, not even all the platforms, in the last couple months, let alone having systems that could ride beside us and try to blunt the edges on these toxic algorithms.
And Charles, I'd love to bring you in here. I mean, you're very well connected in the Gen Z community, and I'd love to hear what you think teens are thinking about this. Obviously, we're all talking about teenagers and children, but it's so important to hear from youth themselves. Do you think that teens who are growing up on social media understand what these companies are doing? And do they have the capability to really withstand the power of these algorithms?
I think what was very interesting when I think about also my time when I worked at TikTok, I think in the first 6 months after I joined the company, I was really proud to wear that TikTok t-shirt on the subway on my way to work. And when the lockdown kind of went down and society continued to act more normal, there were more and more critiques also about the platform in the broader society, especially in Europe when regulation came in. And I remember, I think nearly a year after I joined the company, there was actually somebody approaching me in the subway, telling me their story of how they really got stuck on TikTok into a rabbit hole. And that was not a rabbit hole of cooking or fitness. It actually was a rabbit hole of people giving themselves and each other's tips about self-harm, but self-harm as kind of the tattoos that you involuntarily give you when you scratch your arms quite deep. And while I was on my way to work and then in the office, I thought, okay, maybe this is just a simple case. And then a few days after, I saw this Wall Street Journal article, and I really saw that, okay, maybe this is another thing that somebody put out there against TikTok. But when I checked it, and it only took me these 15 minutes, I realized that the problem, and I think you can always see, if you can reverse engineer the problem very quickly, then it's a broader issue. If it takes you really time to really force it, and this takes hours, then it's more difficult. But I think when it comes down to what teenagers really think about these platforms, if you would ask them, are you in a downward spiral, they will say no. And they will also convince you with that through their feed. But if you then ask them, how many times have you saw content around eat disorders, which is, I think, mainly the biggest problem on TikTok for now, they will say, oh yes, I saw this video about somebody being very skinny. I saw this video about how to eat with less than 1,000 calories a day. I think this comes down to the biggest problem, that these two audiences speak two different languages. Because if TikTok blocks the keyword eat disorder, then what will Gen Z do? They will replace the A with a 4, and they will replace the O with a 0. And the platforms will just say, okay, we've made everything possible. Maybe half of the journalists will say, yes, the keyword is now blocked, but they will not reverse engineer what could happen with other keywords and maybe some quick amendments for the target group. And I believe the solution would be then to kind of even listen more to Gen Z, because as everyone also mentioned today, the solution is very easy, and you can do a lot of great stuff that wouldn't even lead to less screen time, but it would even be an approach that the platforms would need to then actually listen to their users and also be open for critiques.
That's such a good point, Charles. And I think one of the questions that comes up time and time again is, do the companies really know how much their users are being harmed? And that's something that you tried to answer internally, Arturo. You know, you blew the whistle on Facebook and Instagram, but not before you tried to sound the alarm kind of inside the company. And I would like to play the third and final short clip from Can't Look Away, which helps explain how Arturo outlined this inside Facebook and then what happened when he went public. So could we please play clip 3?
In 2019, I decided to go back to work for Instagram. I kept thinking, well, surely the executive team doesn't know the extent to which teens were experiencing harm on the platform. And so I kind of made it my job to make sure that they were aware. So we did a study done by their own world-class research team that couldn't be disavowed. And we asked hundreds of thousands of teenagers, have you ever received unwanted sexual advances on Instagram? 1 in 8, 13 to 15-year-olds. Yes, in the last 7 days. Have you ever felt worse about yourself because of other people's posts on Instagram? 1 in 5 kids said yes in the last 7 days. And once we had all of the data, I wrote that email, which is the one where you tell the executives that there's a critical gap in their understanding and measurement and approach to the harm that people are experiencing, in particular teenagers. And I sent that to Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, Chris Cox, the head of product, Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram.
In that memo, you disclosed to them that according to your own research, 1 in 8 children now, had experienced unwanted sexual advances within the last 7 days. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Those numbers are astounding. I just want to let that sink in. 1 in 8 within 7 days, a third of children outside of that window. Mark Zuckerberg, did he reply to you?
He did not reply.
Did he meet with you?
He did not meet with me. In my 30 years in the industry, if I sent an email like this, the next day I would have a meeting with the executive team. Every time. This was the first time I sent an email like this that I didn't hear back.
They sloughed it off. Money was more important than protecting children.
I think you should ask them that question. These companies will only work on the things that they're incentivized to do. Today, they're incentivized to maximize the amount of time people spend on a product. They're incentivized to maximize the revenue that they make from that. And we as a society have to pay the price.
Arturo, could you talk us through your own decision-making process around going public after you didn't receive the response you wanted from that email? Was there any specific case, incident, or moment for you that made you realize I too can no longer stay silent here?
Yeah, for me, what happened was a year after I sent that email, I ended up in testifying for something. And I saw that email again for the first time, the one I sent to Mark. And And it just hit me pretty hard that hundreds of millions of teens were experiencing substantial harm because of the way these products are designed. Preventable harm. I mean, they have the technology. It wouldn't be super burdensome at all for them to fix it. It's just not a priority. And then the executive team knew and chose to not do the work that was needed there. And so I kind of had to ask myself, who am I protecting? Am I protecting the executive team and the company? Or am I protecting youth? And for me, like, then it became really clear, and there was no looking back. The job was always to protect youth and the people who use the services. And the best way I could do that was through speaking out about these issues. And I mean, I think going back a moment to what you asked about, like, parents and responsibility, everybody has a role to play. Meta's role is to provide a product that is safe enough. You'll never make it perfect because humans, but as it's designed today, it's not safe enough by such a long margin in such a preventable way, like the rabbit holes or death spirals or whatever you want to call them that you can trivially accidentally fall into in a moment of vulnerability. The amount of sexual advances, and to this day, years after I wrote that email, there's still not a way for a boy or a girl to say that's an unwanted advance, right? It's insane, right? And they talk about, oh yeah, we don't allow inappropriate contact, but you can't tell them when it's happening, so how can they even begin to prevent it? And so the product is just not safe enough today, and parents need to know that that's the case. And if you choose to give your kid a phone, I understand not the pressures that go into that. It's important to do it with the eyes open about the harm that is there right now that doesn't need to be there, and it's just part of the work today, really tragically.
And I'm interested now if we could shift the conversation more towards looking forward. So you've all highlighted how these products are harming people, and you've all decided to speak out publicly at great personal risk to yourselves. But I'm curious, what does true accountability look like? When it comes to social media safety, what does success look like? What's your North Star? Francis, could you take that one?
I think it means on multiple levels more transparency, because if you look at how historically we have been able to govern every other industry in our society, it's because we don't rely on any singular actor, any single point of failure to be with the thing that keeps us safe. It's that we expect there to be these networks of different actors who all have different expertise. So, for example, when it comes to cars, it's not just the regulators, it's not just the car companies, it's also insurance companies, it's also liability lawyers, it's also Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There's a whole ecosystem of accountability that all have slightly different strengths, and they all push together, and cars are something like, we have a third as much fatalities per mile driven now than we did in 1960, right? We can do this. But right now, we don't have the basic access to allow market forces to take place, right? Usually we innovate out of problems. We don't just regulate out of them. And right now, if you are, say, a PTA in a middle school, you don't actually have any meaningful data to compare which platform is safer than another. Like, there's easily 20 social media platforms out there right now. You haven't heard of most of them. But you can't actually compete. You can't say innovate and say, we can solve these problems in different ways. Don't you want to come here? Because we don't have any rights to get real information out. So step one is just even basic transparency rights. But beyond that, it's making sure there's money in the system so that those actors, we can bootstrap them. So we can have scholars studying these things. We do have rights to the courthouse, that kind of thing.
Thanks, Francis. And I do just want to remind everyone in the audience that we are opening this up to a Q&A. So if there are any questions, burning questions that you want to ask our panelists, go ahead and write it into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. As Francis mentioned, some advocates focus on regulation, some focus on education, some legislation or litigation. In your perspective, Arturo, and with your experience, where should the efforts be focused? Is there any one area that is like the path forward, the best path forward to instigate real change?
I think that it has to be a combination of regulation and litigation, because if these companies have demonstrated one thing, is that they're not interested in doing substantive change or work. No matter who speaks out, no matter what the data is that comes out, they just seem to, again, do these performative press releases that mislead more than protect. You know, the number of the measure of the safety program should be in terms of the number of kids, not the number of tools. It's no good if a car has 50 airbags if when you crash you still die, right? And so these things, they need to be effective. And so I believe that in the DSA in Europe, I believe in Ofcom in the UK. I'm very excited to see COSA getting reintroduced in the US. And there's these wonderful advocacy groups all over the world. And so if you're interested in helping find an advocacy group and support them in what's it's a long-term uphill battle. And also, I think that the litigation efforts are an essential part of accountability. Again, in a company that, rather than engaging in a reasonable conversation about how you reduce body image content so that you avoid eating disorders, they fight the existence of it. They fight any efforts to understand it. And so they really have to go through those two avenues, I believe.
The effectiveness of the safety tools is such an interesting conversation, because even when you ask the companies, okay, so you have this safety tool out that you're marketing and you're telling people your product's a lot safer by having these guardrails in place, how many people use it? And there's no transparency. You know, how many people are actually actively using that parental control tool or the family safety center? And if the answer is less than 1%, it's not relevant. It's not helping kids. And I don't think that connect is coming through. And I think when people actually push the companies to give those answers, more often than not, unfortunately, we are getting silence there. And I think that's getting increasingly frustrated by some in those child safety advocacy groups that you're talking about. We do have a question in here from the audience. Do you see any signs that tech companies are starting to take real responsibility? Are there any platforms that you think are safer than others, which you would advise people in the audience that, you know, maybe this is a platform that you could allow your child to use over others? I'll open that up to any one of you to take a shot at.
So one of the ones that I learned about a year or two ago, and I you know, these things move fast enough that it's always scary to have to do endorsements on things I haven't looked at in a year. But Blue Fever was very, very popular with college students maybe 2 years ago. And Blue Fever is one of these great illustrations of how, like, we can make really different design choices and get really different outcomes. So usually when we hear anonymous social network, we hear trash fire, right? Like when people get anonymity, they act like assholes. Blue Fever has built an anonymous social network based on image memes, so image macros. So they start with templates that say things like, when I think about going back to school, I feel, or something I've never told my parents is, you know, like, you know, I wish my friends knew this about me, you know, like the things that there's a much broader spectrum of prompts, but that's the kind of way they start the conversations. And kids decorate these images and share them out, and other people comment on them and have conversations with them in the comments. And the way they prevent those conversations becoming really toxic is that they coach the kids. You know, like when you put in a comment, you know, if you use a really mean tone, if you say something really rude, they'll say, hey, like, just so you know, like that, people have said that, like, when you say things like that, it hurts their feelings. And what's crazy is we've known for a long time that works. Like Arturo has spoken publicly about research that Facebook did years and years ago. Like, Arturo, how long ago? Like, are we talking 2012, 2013, or is this in your second round through Instagram when all that happened?
That work was from 2010 to 2015,
Yeah,
and it was
wild.
product that was live and totally worked.
Yeah, wild. Yeah, and because they've gone in there and thought about, like, how do we make a space that people feel happy and healthy, and like gives them a lot of that missing connection that we hope to get from social media, they've actually built something that's a little bit closer. So look, there are things out there. We need to keep investing in them and publicizing them.
Tora, I saw you unmute. Yeah, please jump in too.
Yeah, and I think that the key thing, so we learned that 50 to 75% of people, if you respectfully nudge them and say, hey, you know, that's kind of not the way things kind of play out here. They're like, oh, sorry about that, and they adjust. And then you can separate out the people who will behave intentionally harmfully from the ones that, just need to know how to do that. But I think the most important thing about that work, which is a callback to something that Charles said earlier today, is that absolutely categorically, the North Star has to be listening to young people about what they're experiencing in the language that they're using for it, and then learn from that to figure out how to create an experience that's safe for them, like wholesome for them, right? Because the biggest issue across the board right now is just these companies are just not listening. Because if you were to create something that says like, oh, that's kind of gross, or I notice I'm getting like a set of things that I really don't want to have happen, and you had a single simple interaction to make that stuff go away, it would make all the difference in the world in terms of our experience of things. And that's totally could be implemented rather quickly if it was a priority. And so listening, anything that actively listens to young people and expresses harm in their language from their perspective, allows for them to tell them intensity to see how bad something is, and provides constructive solutions. It's going to be something that works. But that is what needs to happen.
I'm sure a lot of people on this call, and probably all three of you are on the panel, were watching Sarah Wynne-Williams' recent testimony before Congress, another former Facebook employee who is now turned whistleblower. She recently wrote the book Careless People. And one of the most telling things from her testimony that I found was when she spoke about how the executives at that company don't let their own children use these products. And we've actually got a question here from the audience. Do your children use social media? And now, Charles, I know that you don't have any kids yet, and Francis, your children are too young to even probably hold an iPhone. But looking forward, do you think that you will allow your children to use social media? And would you advise parents to let their kids use social media? And if so, what's the right age?
I think one of the things that we are having more conversations about in the last couple of years than we were in the last 10 is a lot of the conversation, the grounding of research and investigation, say in 2017 or 2019, was about 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds on social media. And now we see a lot more conversation on, well, we actually need to have conversations about access to phones, because we're really seeing like 7 and 9 and 8-year-olds gain access to social media. In the US, as recently as 2022, a third of 7 to 9-year-olds said they were on at least one form of social media. The thing I really worry about, and why I will not let my kids go on social media until they're at least 13 or 14, is when I have conversations with younger students, so this is with the 10-year-olds, with the 11-year-olds, it's a little harder to have them with the younger than that, because they're not super reflective in sometimes the larger picture kind of way. They talk about the idea, when I ask, like, why did you do these things? Or like, why were you making videos? Like, why were you trying to get this attention? And they talk about the yearning to go viral. And I worry that we have only begun to see the consequences of creating a generation of child stars. Because if you went back 30 years and looked at which kids under the age of, say, 16 thought about their personal brands, it was a very small population of kids, and they were largely child stars. And those kids didn't turn out great. Children deserve to have space to be able to become themselves. They deserve to have the boredom to force them to introspect themselves. They deserve to not have to think about what others think about them on that kind of level, and with that level of consequences. Because remember, once you post on the internet, it's forever. And so I do think it's reasonable for us to be having conversations around, I think there's an ambiguity on 14 to 16. I think there's a lot less ambiguity, say, under 12, under 13. So that's kind of where I would come in.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Francis. And Charles, I'd like to bring you in here, because since the film has come out, one of the questions we get time and time again is, what can parents do to better protect their children? And I'm curious about your thoughts on that, given you work with Gen Z. What do you think parents should know when it comes to trying to communicate with their kids about using these platforms? Because the philosophy crosses from some who think, kids should never have access to social media and they don't want to give their kids a smartphone until they're 25, all the way through to those who say full access to the internet is so important, kids need it to remain active in society today. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on, like, what you would advise parents about protecting kids.
So I think the number one rule that I will have with my kids is for every piece of content that you consume, you need to create one on your own, because I think this will kind of accomplish a way of gratitude for what's happening also in the creator landscape and industry currently. And I think in times where we just spend 1 or 2 seconds on a single content clip, it's also important to really appreciate how great the creative work also behind this is. And when I talk to parents, but also when I talk to young people, I see one thing that is most common around them is they talk about the feed they don't experience, or they talk about the platform they don't experience. And I think actually where TikTok really made great progress was, I believe in the last really, yeah, in the last half year, they implemented a feature in the Parent Safety Hub where you could actually see the video history of your child. And yes, we all know this comes down to a very small percentage probably that uses this feature, but I really think this is the first really transparent tool where I think this makes sense, and this actually brings progress in, because while I think it's not so important to look at every single clip, it's important to look at the patterns behind it, because as we saw, many of the videos in my feed didn't violate the terms and conditions of TikTok on a singular basis. But in comparison, if you have one person saying, I think my ride will end in 2025, and the next person saying, bridges are a great way to escape after a long day of work, this might not violate it, but in the big picture, it's a huge harm. And my really honest wish to all the parents out there is, you are not too old to use Instagram or TikTok or any of those platforms, because we cannot have a conversation about a tool. It's like the Autobahn if we're not driving on there, and no matter in which car. And so I feel like sitting next to your child and talking about what's on their feed will not happen. But having the thoughts about how is this platform going, how many minutes are my kids spending on there, and then getting also them the appreciation for how the content is consumed, is a way I think we can not only make sure that the responsibility will stay, but also the creativity in between of the minds of the next generation.
But the tiny little thing I would sneak in there real quick, that is, you need to be aware that you really do need to do check-ins and look at your child's feed, because even between college-age women and 13-year-olds, when I talk to college-age women, they say things like, oh yeah, I used to get sent a lot of lewd photos, sometimes by people I didn't know. And as I got older, they just trickled off. And it's because people say children are vulnerable and they don't push back in a way that they might get, you know, a very assertive response from a 19-year-old, and 35-year-olds get almost none. So just make sure you take that with a tiny little grain of salt.
One of the things that, oh, you go, Arturo.
Sorry, I mean, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, because I help my daughter navigate a lot of these things, and I think where I've ended up on all of that for parents is, number one, educate yourself on all of these harms, and kind of be able to talk to your kids to say, look, I mean, this is what eating disorder stuff looks like. It's not like that image. It's like a plate with a piece of broccoli, and there's like 100 of those that make you not want to eat that day, and that you're gonna get that. This is what sexual content looks like. It's not pornography. It's a woman talking about how amazing it is to go get gangbanged in a bar later that day. And these are all examples of video that gets recommended to 13-year-olds in my testing. Know that, you know, you're gonna get dick pics and people asking you for sex over DMs. And this is just it's going to happen, right? Like if you look at the numbers on every study, including Deep, right? The numbers is, this is totally going to happen to your kid. Your kid is going to run into that. And it's not about vulnerable kids. It's about a kid in a moment of vulnerability, like we all had when we were young. Like somebody tells you something, you kind of feel bad about your body, and then you get home and you look at something like that. It gets in, right? And so ultimately, making it as safe as possible for your kid to talk with you about these issues, and also making sure that your kid knows that when emotionally intense stuff happens, because again, bullying and stuff like that will happen in comments and things, to never be alone, right? You totally understand if they don't want to talk to you about like sexting and stuff like that, but then make sure that they have somebody that they trust so they don't feel alone when these things do happen.
I have had a lot of conversations with child safety advocates and experts about this exact topic as well. And something I hear time and time again is like, show them the monsters. Talk early and often with your children about what risks are out there. And there is that strategy. But other countries, and I'm seeing a lot of comments coming through and a lot of questions coming through about what are other countries, not the US, doing to try and protect kids? And particularly, you know, what are your thoughts on what countries like Australia and New Zealand are doing? We've seen Australia move to actually ban all children under the age of 16 from using social media as a law. And New Zealand has recently introduced a similar bill. Do you think that's the answer?
And I'll go quickly on that, which is I believe that these products, as they're designed today, are not safe enough for like a 13-year-old. And I wish that wasn't the case. It doesn't need to be the case. I wish companies were doing the work to make it safe for them, which they can totally do. But in a world where the company is aware of the harm, choosing not to address it, and then preventing other people from understanding the harm, right, which is what the playbook of these companies, the car is not safe enough to give the keys to kids right now, even though I really wish it was, because I believe in the good of these platforms. So I'm currently of the school of, you know what, wait a couple of years, as long as you can. That's what I would do with my kid if I had to do it all over again. But the goal is really to have safe products, right? I mean, the question is, how do we get there?
I've got an interesting question here that I'd like to throw your way, Francis, which is on this topic, which it's coming from an educator in Mauritius and South Africa saying, I see social media's impact on students in a context that's quite different from the US or Europe. How do you see the risks and harms playing out in smaller or developing countries? And what can we do to address those unique challenges? Can you speak to that?
I think the problem starts at you don't even have to get into that much of a smaller country. It's a question of like, if you step outside of the language of English, maybe German, you know, maybe French, but even to Spanish, like Spanish has 1 billion speakers in the world. Like I live in a Spanish speaking place, and we're raising our child to be bilingual. Like she will use the internet in Spanish. And you know, these companies, because they only do what they think they absolutely have to do to avoid the worst blowback, they know they're American companies. They know most people in the United States speak English. And so what little safety dollars they invest in safety, they invested in English. And the way this plays out is really, really remarkable. So there was a little bit of a scandal a couple months ago because a child psychologist in Denmark quit Facebook's self-harm advisory panel because she had joined 2.5 years before, because a Norwegian newspaper had reported there was a network of around 530 Instagram accounts in Danish and Norwegian that were very openly promoting self-harm. Like we're talking picture of train tracks, black and white, going off in the distance, today is a great day to die. Like real graphic, no ambiguity here. And when they flagged this content for Instagram, none of it got taken down. And over the course of just their reporting, which was a few months, around 30 of the 530 girls killed themselves. And so she joined this advisory committee, or Facebook invited her after she spoke out about it. And 2.5 years later, most of those accounts were still up. Right. And it's because there's maybe 5 million Norwegian speakers in the world. Right. There's a lot of smaller languages. India, for example, has 14 languages that have 10 million or more speakers. Right. When you don't have accountability globally, you end up in a situation where they just leave all that dangerous stuff up. It's a much, much, much more dangerous experience than even in the United States.
Yeah, I feel like so many of these conversations are US centric, but this is a global issue and these are global companies. We've got a question here that's come in saying, should we not consider using social media the same as drinking alcohol, driving a car, having sex? Surely there should be age restrictions. Charles, I want to throw this your way. Like if we are to put age restrictions on a platform, as someone who is so connected with Gen Z and who did grow up on social media, what do you think is an appropriate age?
I thought about the comparison of saying at which age would you have your daughter go at home at night on her own? Because the answer to the question is, at some kind of age, she needs to do it on her own. And there is a difference in between her doing it alone and her doing it with her best friend, her doing it at daylight and her doing it at night. But the answer is, everybody of us has an age in their mind, or has in their mind that we wouldn't have them unaccompanied at night, mostly at any age. So I believe it's really about accompanying really your kids, but not in the end banning it for everybody under a certain age. Why? Because when we look at what happened when we banned smoking for under 18 years olds and all of that time, I mean, I think Gen Z has one really crazy attitude. We always find ways to go against the rules. And if it's forbidden in the end, they will also have kind of their ways to interact with it. It would make it even more attractive for young people to try to chase it. So in the end, I would say, yes, we need a restriction, but this restriction is more content-wise and not so much just regarding the age behind it.
Though to chime in real quickly there, like the big difference, like let's say we were looking at cigarettes or we were looking at alcohol, right? Like if you're underage in the United States, you can't get access to alcohol till you're 21. But people go to their best friend who is a couple years older, and because they're in college, and they buy alcohol for them, or so-and-so's uncle gets you alcohol. The equivalent in a world like this, because the reality is you can find all the kids, right? Some of those low-hanging fruit that's been asked for years. Meta only just started using them a couple months ago. It's things like kids post lots and lots of photos. You can tell who owns the account very rapidly because they show up in the most photos, and you can tell approximately how old they are, right? This is one of these things where in a world where it's your uncle buying you booze or it's your older friend buying you booze, that means you're sitting with someone else accessing social media. And what you're not going to get in a world where that kind of thing is happening is you're not going to have 12-year-olds, you're not going to have 10-year-olds who can't focus in school the next day because they've been up till 2 a.m. They're not going to have kids showing up at the school nurse saying, I have a stomach ache because they're running on 5 hours of sleep, which is happening every day across the United States right now. So just to put in a little, sprinkle some context in there.
One of the other things we've been hearing from parents is, if you threaten to take the product away from the child, that can actually have serious negative impacts now too, because there is a layer of addiction there, where it's like for you to walk in and ground your child or say they're in trouble and you take that phone away, like a lot of them don't know how to comprehend that and how to actually live in a world without a cell phone. So if a parent is listening to this call and is thinking, my child is struggling and I can see them using the phone late at night and I can see them really, getting addicted to this product in quite a scary way. What is the right solution to move forward? Because obviously just ripping it out of their hands might actually do more harm than good. Turo, do you have any insights there?
No.
So I think usually I am not a technology as a solution. Like I'm always like, can we throw some humans in this? But I think a really easy thing that can have, let's ask this question of how do you titrate away? There's an app called, I believe, 1sec that is, it makes you wait. It makes you wait for 30 seconds to get into any application that you flag. And it tells you how many times you opened it that day. So you can have things where you can begin to step that kid away, where you're not asking them to sit there for a long time, or like you go from having this coping mechanism to being normal amounts of dopamine. You can say like, hey, like let's begin just putting a little bit more friction, let's put in a time limit that cuts off at 2 a.m., right? Like let's put in, now it's 1 a.m., now it's midnight. Like you can step them down. And I think to emphasize what Charles has been saying over and over again, this thing, approach it from empathy around what your kid's experience is. Because, part of why they changed the recommendations in, say, psychiatric hospitals, where it used to be they'd say, take your kid's phone away. They now, in many places, will not give that advice because you're right, kids will hurt themselves if they go cold turkey. But we need to be starting to standardize and make people aware of like, this is how you do titrate your kids down to help them step back to something closer to normal.
Thank you, Francis. And I mean, this is such a difficult subject to talk about. It's a scary issue for everyone around the world. You know, everyone's trying to figure this out right now. And before we close, I do want to try and end on a positive note. I want to hear from each of you, you know, as you look forward, where do you see hope? You've all decided to go public. You've all put yourselves at personal risk, and you've all sparked change in different ways. So individually, you know, what gives you hope now looking forward? Charles, can you go first?
I believe if we look at the social media and platform industry 3 years ago, more and more platforms back at that time really said, no, we don't have the issue. Like 3 years later now, they at least maybe they don't comment on it. Maybe they say we're doing X, Y, Z around it. So I believe the first step to more transparency is actually the visibility of the problem. And I think that has increased very well also through the media coverage, but also through the big platforms, at least in their communications teams, having a look at what's coming in there and then doing the research. And we all know that the communications teams, they do this and they do the research behind it and at least check what's behind this. And I believe that's the first step. And what gives me hope is that when I talk in Germany to the really young 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, they are really not so much triggered about social media as, for example, my generation is. So they, for example, my smaller sister, she has deactivated all the social media apps while she had her graduation class and the final exams, because she said, okay, this will just disturb me that much. And I think that, of course, this is not true to everyone in that generation, but I think once you grow up with this very fast and once you have access to everything at the young age, maybe we will also come to a point where we will just say, okay, if you have everything, you naturally know where it is enough. I know that's only true to a part of this, but this is kind of my perspective on it.
Thank you. Francis, what gives you hope?
Things like this conversation, right? You know, the way we change expectations, the way companies get scared and actually invest in making things better is we turn up the heat. You know, one of the things that was really heartening for me on watching the documentary was, you know, I've met a bunch of those parents who are interviewed in it. I've watched those gatherings of parents, and you know, one of them said, you know, stronger together. You know, the way we actually get to have nice things, we all deserve nice things, is we, you know, tell each other like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. Like your child wasn't a bad child and that's why they suffered. You know, we have to work together in order to make things better. So
Thank you, Francis. And Arturo, I'll give you the last word here. What gives you hope for the future?
I think that as a society, we've turned a corner on how we see these things. And while regulation and some of those machines move very slowly, for every parent that has turned the grief of losing a child or the stress of something awful happening to them into advocacy, for every person I've met inside the regulators who cares about these issues, and really finding ways within the means available to them to make a difference. For every reporter, like Olivia, really cannot speak highly enough of the reporting you have done, and the change you've driven on extortion is extraordinary, right? And that wouldn't have happened without your article. And so I think that there's really so many people, Francis's courage, which inspired me. I mean, that note I sent to Mark was a response to Francis' testimony. And to see Charles speaking on the way he's right now, right? And so I think that what we need to do is we just need to stay on it and be patient and nurture and support each other. Because I think that the things is starting to head in the right direction, and we stay on it, we will end up in a better place.
Thank you, Arturo. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Charles. I think that is a great note to end on. And thank you all for being here with us today for this important and urgent conversation. Especially a huge thank you again to our panelists for their honesty, their courage, their commitment to protecting children and to corporate accountability. And to our audience, all of those who are here with us today, thank you for showing up, because these conversations matter. but they can only make an impact if you're here with us and if we all work to try and keep that conversation going, as Arturo mentioned. And we invite you all to continue the journey by watching this documentary. Can't Look Away is available on jolt.film. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us or write in the Q&A and we'll get back to you. And we hope that you'll share it, that you'll watch it, that you'll talk about it, and that you'll help us push this movement forward, keep this conversation going. So thank you again for everyone for joining us today.